What's going on, guys? I'm Zach,
I'm Levi.
and welcome to Blitz and Gigs, episode 6.
All right, let's get into it.
Super Bowl 57. Or is it 58?
It's one of those numbers, man. I don't even know. I know Super Bowl 50 was the Peyton and Cam one, and I haven't really paid attention ever since.
That's right. You're probably right. It's probably 58, 59.
Man, Chiefs and Eagles. I was spot on.
You were spot on. You've been leaning Chiefs this whole way here. It's been since day one. You've been leaning for a three-peat. So, any cause for change here?
I mean, my pick is still staying the same. I'm still riding with the Chiefs for the sake of Pat knows how to win in January. Andy Reid is the greatest offensive mind I've ever seen. And their receiving core is really nice, clicking at the right time. Travis Kelce is still Travis Kelce. That Pat and Trav connection is still strong. Their run game looks better than it did the last two Super Bowls that they were in my opinion, because I think Kareem Hunt, at least right now, is a better back than Isaiah Pacheco, just with the additional experience, and he's still fast.
And the Pacheco injury.
And, that plays into it for sure. This is, probably the second best Chiefs defense that Pat has ever had, last year being the best with L'Jarius Sneed now going to the Titans. Still a top 5 defense in the league, at least pass defense. I think the game is going to be won or lost on the ground, with Saquon obviously going against that Chiefs run defense, which is not the best in the league, but it's, they're no pushovers. So, I mean, you really just got to limit Saquon to like 125, and then I think the game is very manageable for Kansas City.
Yeah, I think Kansas City's probably looking to do even more than that. Also, we were totally wrong. It's Super Bowl 59. But with that being said, I think you're totally right about the rushing. It's going to come down to which team's able to control the clock, keep the ball away from the other guy. Obviously Kansas City and Spags is going to try and limit Saquon's touches, his yards per touch, etc. But I think if they are successful in stopping the run, I think Philly has enough on the outside to manage and to get over that hump. I mean, we actually thought that it was going to be a similar game plan in the last Super Bowl, I believe, and then Jalen Hurts played out of his mind. He had, I believe, 3 or 4 total touchdowns, and it was one of the best games of his career in the biggest spot. So I'm looking at Jalen Hurts to have another big performance, another big game, and I think I'm going to side with the Eagles here.
Gotcha. Now, do you think next year, I mean, you might not have a full view of all of the Eagles' deals. Kansas City's deals are kind of crazy. Like, they've made so many additions at the trade deadline and in free agency this year. The Eagles moving forward, I know they have Saquon next year as well. Other than that, like, a lot of defensive signings with some of these vets that they brought in, including Zach Vaughn, who upped his value by $1 million, and their offensive line still being mostly young, their defense mostly young. Do you think they'll be able to reciprocate the success next year? I mean, not that last year was any kind of joke in the regular season, but they all kind of fell apart at the end.
Yeah, I'm looking at their cap situation right here. I think they do have a couple defensive pieces that are going to be free agents after this season, and then the main offensive piece that I'm seeing here is Mekhi Becton. But I mean, I think Philly's front office is so good. I mean, they've just been able to manipulate the cap in such a way that very few teams have. I mean, other than like San Fran and the Rams, they're just able to put their team in contention every year and have a good roster. So I think along with Washington in that division, they're going to be in that playoff discussion for a while. I know they're paying Jalen Hurts a lot of money right now, which definitely hurts their chances. But I don't know. I think as long as you have a healthy A.J. Brown, Saquon, of course, that top-tier O-line is really hard not to be in that playoff discussion.
For sure. And then on the Kansas City side of things, I know neither of us really expect them to fall out of playoff contention. Their division is heating up, though, and you factor in, some important signings here on the O-line. Trey Smith is expected to leave their entire receiving core. Like, they need some young answers fast, and they got Xavier Worthy in this draft, but, who's next? And they need they need more consistency in that receiver room from year to year, as opposed to just pulling these guys for the playoffs the way they do. I mean, they've cut and signed Mecole Hardman like 3 times for each Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect them to fall out of Super Bowl contention, but would you say that we might see them have more struggle in the regular season than they did this year?
Yeah, no doubt. I think you hit it on the head as far as them needing more talent on the outside. I mean, They do have Rasheed coming back, and hopefully he looks 100% and healthy next year. Xavier Worthy has become a nice volume target for them, which originally we thought he was going to be a gadget guy, so it's nice to see for them. But I don't know. It's with the way that they constructed Pat's deal, I think that they've made themselves pretty flexible, relatively compared to other top market guys guys like Trevor Lawrence and the Jags and etc. So I think that they'll be in a good spot. I mean, you're going to lose DeAndre Hopkins, and he's probably not a huge positive right now for the team anyway. I mean, he's old. He's had a nice career, but he's not giving you 10 catches a game now. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I know you mentioned their division is heating up, and especially coaching-wise, it's starting to get pretty competitive. Sean Payton and Jim Harbaugh are going to be in that playoff discussion every year as long as they have competent front office. Is there a team that, I mean, I know we say it every year, but is there a team that you think maybe could give them trouble in the division?
I mean, I could expect them to split the series with any one of these teams, truth be told. And I mean, other than maybe the Raiders, but the Raiders could be outstanding next year, if Pete Carroll assembles the right coaching staff. And I mean, they're still looking for a quarterback, but I don't think they're far out of it. I don't think they're ever far out of it with Pete Carroll. He was, an underrated coaching candidate in my opinion. And despite his age, he's putting together a decent staff. And they have Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers. They have a split back scheme, which is not exceptional. Neither of these backs are really, terribly efficient with Madison and I forget the other.
It's not coming to mind either.
Yeah, but still some talent on that defense. You could trade out of some of the more expensive deals if you'd like. Continue to just get younger and get a young quarterback, and I don't think they're far out of being in that same range that LA was in this year, Denver was in this year, of that 6 to 8 loss team.
Yeah. I mean, to answer your original question, as far as regular season struggles may go, I don't think it matters. I mean, like we've discussed in previous episodes, until somebody takes the crown from Patrick, it's his division, his conference, his league to lose. I've projected for the last 2 rounds that I think the quarterback on the other side of the field is going to take it from him, and they haven't. So we'll see if Jalen Hurts is able to do it, but regular season-wise, I mean, they could finish with 10, 11 wins, and I think most people would still bet them to get to the Super Bowl next year. It doesn't really matter how they look because, I mean, the last 3 years, right, since they lost Tyreek, the regular season, at least offensively, hasn't been overwhelmingly impressive. Their offense hasn't been as efficient as it used to be. The turnovers for Patrick have definitely skyrocketed compared to how it was early in his career. The real story has been the defense, becoming a top 3 scoring defense over the last 3 years since that Tyreek departure just speaks to how good that front office is and how well they've been able to bounce back and rebuild the team. You go from a explosive pass-heavy team to a run-first defensive team that, can keep any game in the teens with anybody. And making Pat more of a game manager like Tom Brady always was, I think, is more of a recipe to win Super Bowls. So, not saying that they couldn't before because we've seen Patrick win Super Bowls in shootouts, but this is more sustainable.
For sure. Just the more tried and true way of having balance on both sides. Defense or offense doesn't really win championships anymore. You need both. And I think the Chiefs are looking to do exactly that. And the Eagles are really doing the same thing. I mean, their defense has been laughable the last few years, pretty much all of Jalen Hurts' career. And this is the first year that they have a competent, young, talented defense, and credit to Vic Fangio for that.
Yeah, so last week you said if Pat wins this championship and gets the first three-peat ever, he is the GOAT. Are you still standing on that?
I'm still standing on that. I think it's just remarkably impressive to see somebody who has shifting circumstances, different roster, different offensive coordinators almost every year. The only consistent piece of that team, other than Travis Kelce, has been Andy Reid. And now that this defense is really good, it's easy to say that he's been carried, but he carried the defense for so many years. This is just him showing that he's able to do it in every fashion of the game, whereas Tom Brady, had a pretty consistent roster throughout most of his career. Really solid defense under Bill Belichick, one of the greatest defensive coaches ever. And, his receivers, the speedy slot guys and just his kind of guys that he turned from, B tier into S tier guys in the right moment. And Pat did that last year. with Rashee Rice, who kind of wasn't on anyone's radar until the playoffs. He really heated up. And I think Pat's going to continue to do that with these young, talented guys that they might get in the second, third, fourth round. I don't expect him to fall out of that. A part of it is that my expectations for the future are so high, especially if they win this Super Bowl. But even right now with 4 rings and a three-peat, yeah, I'm standing on that. I think he's the GOAT.
So a question to go kind of hand in hand with that. Do Mahomes and Reed, at least on the Chiefs side of the ball, do they have the most to gain from a Super Bowl win here?
I mean, I think Jalen wants to prove that he can do it, but the narrative's not going to change, even if it should, that he's being carried to this bowl, on the legs of Saquon Barkley and the backs of that offensive line. Nick Sirianni said nobody wins a Super Bowl or any kind of game without help, and he's absolutely right for that. But at the same time, Jalen Hurts has more help than anyone does in the league this year, other than maybe Jared Goff. And Jared Goff, in the right moment, made the wrong decisions. I don't think Jalen Hurts is that unsafe with the ball in his hands, but I think he has a lot to prove in future years when he has less help around him and when his contract starts to eat away at the guys around him. Whereas Pat and the Chiefs, they just continue to establish their dominance, their legend. They got to do it sometime. Why not now?
Okay. So I kind of want to run through the scenarios here. So we discussed what a Chiefs win would look like. How would you view the Chiefs and Mahomes specifically going forward if they were to lose the Super Bowl?
If they lose the Super Bowl, I mean, I think they got to really get a hold of their cap situation, which is not terrible, but, you've got to let these vet receivers go. Hollywood Brown has been good, not great for them, and he hasn't really been good anywhere else. So I think you'd start to see that, without the amount of talent they have in that receiving room, that he just is not going to be consistent. And I think you want to get younger there. So I think they need to continue to draft, not only, maybe working out your left and right tackle, but, help on the outside, help in the receiving room, and, maybe even down the line and back, because Isaiah Pacheco's 60 yards a game, maybe 80 all-purpose is not quite doing it to take the weight off of Pat. I think there are going to be times in the future, like there were in the Super Bowl against Tom Brady, where he's not able to do it all himself. And I think it would look like scaling back and slowing down the progression. I think they don't want to fall off of this Super Bowl pedestal just yet, and that's why they're throwing all this money in the receiving room.
If they were to lose the Super Bowl, do you almost hope that Kelce retires? Because he's not cheap and he's not getting any better. We've seen him start to fall off last year, and it's definitely a big drop in production this year. He's making $17 million a year, and he'll be on contract, I believe, another 2 years. So,
I mean, he's going to be 37, 38 by the time he finishes that deal. That's just atrocious. Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make, that, it really starts with him. It starts with the guys who are not here for the first time, but the guys who have been here just way too long. Kelce has had a great career, and it's really respecting the same thing it was with Jason Kelce. He's going to leave when he's ready to leave, not when we push him out. Great culture guy, but, at the end of the day, you got to go when you got to go. Right. And he's going to be a Hall of Famer either way. So if they win, I would hope that he chooses to win on top and retire. If they lose, I mean, it's going to be a little bit harder for him to choose to remain a loser, but you've got 3 rings anyway.
Right. So he signed a 2-year extension in 2024 for $34 million, so $17 million a year. If he wasn't to retire after the outcome of this Super Bowl, he will still be on the books next year for $17 million, and then his contract would end. I think at the most he'll probably retire by the end of that, right?
I would anticipate him playing out that year more than likely, and then Tyreek's going to keep signing these 1 and 2 year deals, until he gets his ring, which he may not do. If you extended for 3 or 4 someplace, then it'd be much more likely. Kelce's doing it because he's at the end of his playing years, and I don't think you want to play too long to the point where it's a detriment to your health. So yeah, I can't really imagine him playing beyond that.
Okay. So looking over at the Eagles side of things, what would a Philadelphia win mean for this team, for Jalen Hurts' legacy, for Nick Sirianni's legacy, a guy who most people aren't high on? How differently do we view this whole team, as chaotic as they've been, as talented as they are? What would the story be for this team? What would the legacy be?
I don't think people would appreciate it now, but I would appreciate Jalen Hurts a lot more, with 1 ring. If he has all the pieces around him and he's able to do it, then it makes him, obviously a tier above Brock Purdy, who had even better pieces around him last year and wasn't able to do it. I feel like it doesn't solidify him as a top 5 in the league right now, but it would make him an undebatable top 10. And just consistently a guy who you can count on to not end your game, to not throw it away for the rest of your team. For Nick Sirianni, I mean, he's already got the greatest win percentage of any coach with as many starts as he has, and I feel like that's about the best accolade he's ever going to get. Even with a ring, I don't anticipate it really changing the narrative on him, which is that he doesn't do a lot. He's not as big on discipline as Dan Campbell is. He doesn't call an offense. He doesn't call a defense. What does he do other than tell the guys good job,
Would you view Sirianni, if he was to win this Super Bowl, as a guy whose job is like solidified, no longer touchable, at least for the foreseeable future? Or do you think a bad year next year and a slow start to the year after that, he's on the hot seat and he's getting out of there because of Philly's culture?
I mean, I think it extends his window a little bit. People were shocked for Lovie Smith to get fired by the Bears after a 10-6 season. Sirianni has had consistently great regular seasons with the Eagles, and a Super Bowl would really make it to where it'd be hard to fire him for the next 2 or 3 years at least.
Okay. I think a good comparison for this team would be the 2008 Florida Gators, in the sense that there's so many personalities on the team, like Tebow, Hernandez, Cam, etc. Just so much talent, yet so much personality on one field. And maybe in the moment, it would be like, wow, props to the coach, props to the front office for getting this thing to gel enough to win the bowl. But I think over time, people would look back at it as one of the all-time good teams. Maybe not one of the top of the top teams like the '85 Bears or the '07 Patriots or etc. But with the amount of talent that's on the squad, I mean, it would be hard to deny that this is one of the better Super Bowl champions within the last decade or so, if they were to win this game.
Arguably comparable to Tom Brady's Bucks, with Bruce Arians.
Like
Todd
that.
Bowles is a great defensive coordinator. Obviously Tom Brady, a great receiver room with an early Chris Godwin, a prime Mike Evans, and a close to prime AV.
Right.
Leonard Fournette, not a top 5 back at the time, but a top 10 or close to it. Good O-line, great defense, just all positions clicking. But we don't look back on that team as a dominant team because, they barely scraped by in the playoffs, and even to make the playoffs, they had their struggles in the regular season for sure. And it was on that miracle. I don't even remember the receiver. It was that miracle catch that kept them in the playoffs, I think in the divisional round. Scotty Miller, that's it. And just, without that play, that chip doesn't exist. Pat probably has another chip. So we don't look on this team with dominance unless they do it, multiple times.
Sure.
2 years ago, it seemed like a very different Eagles team that was in the Super Bowl,
Right.
and they didn't win. So I think the narrative would shift a little bit if they win the Super Bowl, but we're not going to look at them like they're the Chiefs or even the Bills or Ravens, one of these teams that's consistently dominant every year.
Interesting.
They're a team that's great and that's in that Super Bowl bubble, but maybe not quite there.
So now, lastly, if they were to lose the Super Bowl, what does this team look like going forward? At the head coaching spot, at the quarterback spot, this is in key spots, it's a younger team, an edge rusher, corner, quarterback, receiver, running back, all of the above. They're a relatively young team, but with a Super Bowl loss here, especially like a coaching masterclass from Andy Reid, is Sirianni's job on the hot seat with a Super Bowl loss? Is that crazy to say?
2 Super Bowl losses at that point, right? So I think arguably, yeah, but it would take the wheels falling off next season like they did last year in 2023 for it to really happen, I think. I wouldn't expect them going into the playoffs with an interim head coach or with a first-year head coach. They're way too late to throw their name in the running for any of these top coaching candidates. Most of them have been snatched up. And with that in mind, I think it's just not the time. I think you'd ride it out with Sirianni and fire him if you need to, if he's looking like he's going to finish at 9-8, 8-9 next year. But if that's not happening, then you just wait for the coaching cycle to restart and, do it at a better time.
If they lose this Super Bowl and fire Sirianni, would McCarthy bring him back next year? Because, you make the point that all the good candidates are gone, but McCarthy's still sitting out there.
McCarthy would make Jalen Hurts look better, in my opinion.
He looked real nice.
Better than he looks under Kellen Moore. And I say that because Dak once had some rushing upside. It started to slip. Jalen's rushing upside is still there, but it's kind of skewed by the rushing touchdown stat compared to the yardage and the efficiency. But you're looking at somebody who is turnover prone. Dak had his worst year in terms of turnovers under Kellen Moore his last year in Dallas. McCarthy starts calling plays. Things become simplified. You start running the West Coast, and with as much talent as they have in Philly, I think it would be perfect for Mike McCarthy. I think he could find a way to... My only concern would be him utilizing Saquon Barkley the way he needs to be used, which I think Kellen Moore has done a great job of utilizing Saquon Barkley, but with an O-line, with a QB like Jalen, with a good arm, not necessarily a great head on his shoulders, but a good arm, great talent in the receiver room, I don't think McCarthy could screw that up. I think they might improve.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at those Dallas teams within the last 5 years or so under his tenure, when the defense has been elite for stretches, you've had an elite defensive mind, calling the plays with Dan Quinn, and Philly has Vic Fangio, you just leave the defense to him, let McCarthy call the plays, let him make Jalen Hurts look like the all-pro caliber guy he was under Shane Steichen. It would be very difficult to pick against Philly next year. I think the only question mark this whole, relatively dominant regular season and playoff run that they've had over the last couple of years has been Sirianni. So, a coaching change, it seems like we call for coaching changes a lot here, but I do think with McCarthy, in Philly, I think that would be a very interesting look. I think that would, potentially put them over the top if Sirianni does it this year.
I would agree.
So, one of the craziest trades in sports history happened over the weekend. We haven't talked too much NBA on the pod thus far, but Luka Doncic is a Laker. He's going to be playing with LeBron James for the foreseeable future. Just mind-blowing how a front office can fumble a generational talent like that. I mean, what are your initial thoughts on the trade?
I don't think it puts either team necessarily in a win-now state, because you take away the top scorer from the Mavs and you pin another top scorer with the Lakers, but it doesn't help them on defense. In fact, they lose AD, who, when healthy, is a defensive force, but he's really healthy these days, so I can't really blame LA for that. Mm-hmm. I'm really at a loss for words in general. Yeah,
it's quote-unquote a 3-team trade, but the Jazz really didn't gain anything significant out of it. So the Mavericks received Anthony Davis and a first-round pick in, I believe, 2029 from the Lakers, and the Mavericks received Luka Doncic, Maxi Kleber, another role player, and I believe that was it. But the question now for LA is, do they make another trade? And if they do, is it for a big man to contend now, or is it to trade LeBron James so they can start a rebuild and get him to play with Steph Curry to finish out his career? Because I think that those are really the only two paths you can go down this current iteration with, two of the best playmakers in the history of our game, two of the best offensive forces in Luka and LeBron, even with him at his current age. That's not quite enough. It's going to be extremely exciting to see on the court, but no size, no rebounding, no defense. You're not going to win a chip that way. The Lakers' defense this year, outside of Anthony Davis, wasn't great. Take him away, and what are they? I think as far as the details of the trade, I think people are being a little bit too hard on Dallas. I still think that they'll be a very nice playoff team. Kyrie, Anthony Davis, and the role players that they have on that team is a very nice squad. They'll probably be a second round exit, but how do you justify trading away a top 3 player in your respective league and get one first round pick out of it? And that first round pick isn't going to be a good pick because Luka's on the Lakers. So it's just mind blowing how that front office can fumble it that bad.
The only thing that I can picture is that they're just clearing space, for the future, and they're looking to start a rebuild now, but Luka Doncic is 25 years old. Like, why would you want to pivot out of that? Generational talent.
He just took them to the finals, and he is 25 years old. You had the young star on your team already. Why start a rebuild? Why get old?
You have rebuilt.
Yes.
And arguably could be even pushing the needle even further, right? They added Kyrie last year and, continuing to move forward, building talent around Luka. I mean, people argue about his discipline, and there's an argument to be had there, right? No defense, and he's 270 pounds, but he's an incredible scorer, and it doesn't take away from the fact that he's a superstar, that, there are flaws to his game that could easily be adjusted.
Sure. I think one of the bigger discussions is like a comparison in sports, because there really hasn't been a trade that is comparable to this one. Is there something that stands out to you, as in like, is there an NFL comp? Is there a soccer comp, a baseball comp that just, looks similar to this? Because it's just unprecedented.
I mean, from the Lakers' perspective, I've made the comparison to, the Packers drafting Jordan Love, and you're just looking to get younger. You're preparing for the exit of LeBron, who is one of the greats that we've ever seen play. Obviously, I mean, I think LeBron's kind of the GOAT, but like Aaron Rodgers is maybe the most talented quarterback that I've ever seen play football. And it's going to be an ugly exit if he sticks around the next 3 years. So let's prepare his replacement, hope that he can take a graceful exit, and we'll just move forward from there. With the exception of Luka being far more proven than Jordan Love was, when they drafted him. From the Mavs standpoint, I mean, you could see it as like Tyreek leaving the Chiefs, after some very successful years, just looking to get money elsewhere. But Luka's not making more money with the Lakers. He, can't get a supermax now.
Right.
It's really unprecedented, and that would suggest that like Kansas City was taking themselves out of contention by, letting Tyreek leave, which they obviously haven't. This Mavs team without Luka is further from the championship than I think they realize.
1,000%. I mean, when's the last time a team that just lost in the championship trades away their star player? And I think the main issue is that they didn't, start a bidding war. They called the Lakers straight up and said, "Hey, you guys want Luka? Give us AD and a first, and we'll send it in." How do you not let the rest of the owners know Luka is available? Contending teams like San Antonio, Houston, young teams that have a boatload of picks, a boatload of young talent. If the route you're going for is to get younger, which you already have a young team, you have a young star. If that's the route you want to go down, go milk one of these other teams that have plenty of assets. It's inexcusable to leave that trading room, or war room, if you will, with a first round pick and an old, injury-prone defensive star.
31-year-old. You're getting older, and you're not getting closer to the end goal. This isn't, the Bucks pulling out all the stops to win their Super Bowl, bringing in AB, who's a liability, right?
Right.
In terms of injury and, the kind of person that he is, because they didn't give up a lot for AB, and AB produces a lot more than AD does at this point.
Right. I think having, two of the top 3 or 4 guys in basketball that you'd want in a crunch time situation. I mean, LeBron's still that guy. 5 minutes left in a playoff game. You're not picking, 3 guys over him right now. He's still elite in that aspect. And if you were going to pick a guy over him, one of them would be Luka. So do you view it as, they're going to be fighting for the ball in those crunch time situations? Or do you think that this is just going to be one of the most elite crunch time teams that we've ever seen? Because it's just shot creation, like crazy.
I mean, you'd be looking at like the 2024 Olympic team, right? It's just scorers, proven scorers. I would hope that Luka would, have the humility to take that backseat role to LeBron in his last, year or two of carrying the rock. But man, I think it's going to be difficult when egos collide. I don't think that these are the 2 biggest egos in basketball, but, obviously they have every right to be. And with that in mind, I think they'll gel a little bit, mostly just because of the age gap, as opposed to like the Brooklyn Nets bringing in KD and James Harden, and there's more separation here. So you could obviously see it being a mentor-mentee role, but take away that age gap, and I think it would get very dangerous.
Yeah, the 2020s Nets is actually a really good team to bring up. I think Luka is a bad off-ball player. He's a very high percentage ball centric guy. He's going to want to bring the ball up the court most possessions, and lucky for him at this point in LeBron's career, LeBron's able to play off that. He's allowed guys like Anthony Davis and Austin Reeves to really step their game up and get more involved. So I do think that this is going to be a great team. I think they were the 5 seed in the West when the trade happened. I think that they'll stay right around that mark with Denver, OKC, and Houston, bringing up the top 3 going into the playoff stretch here. What would you say the ceiling is for this team? I know you say you probably wouldn't lean for them to win a title. Can they make a conference finals? Do you think that it's going to get messy? You think it'll be a first round exit? Where do you lean here?
It really depends on their path, through the playoffs, but I wouldn't put any limit to what LeBron could do, even with an aging roster. People try to discredit the bubble win, but I think it's just because it wasn't expected and it wasn't wanted. You can hate him, but you got to respect him. And even at this point in his career, I like what JJ Redick is doing. I like the direction he has the Lakers going in. Just higher shot percentages, and trading out an aging star like AD shows that they're in it for the next few years. So I don't think there's as much pressure this year as people like to believe. There's not pressure on Luka at all. He's 25 years old and he just brought them to the finals. But I think their ceiling could be a conference championship. I've no doubt about that.
So I want to take a look really quick at the biggest winner and the biggest loser of the trade here. And I think for me, the biggest loser of this trade has got to be Anthony Davis. I mean, you look at a guy who the reins were going to be handed over to him in a year or two when LeBron goes. He was stunned by the trade himself. I think he expected to be a Laker for life at that point. And he had just this past year and into this year, he had started to hit the stretch of really playing healthy basketball. He had been an injury-prone player his entire career, and finally last year he really put it together and played a very large portion of the season. And I just think it sucks for him. I mean, he's gonna ride out the rest of his career on a mediocre Mavericks team that doesn't have any first-round picks, doesn't have any youth around him. Kyrie Irving is only going to decline at this point in his career, and he's injury-prone as well. It's really unfortunate because the Lakers didn't have a ton of draft capital themselves, but they had guys like Austin Reeves, like Dalton Knecht, and they had young talent that had LeBron retired next year or so, or had the Lakers gone the route to trade him. Anthony Davis in that general Lakers regime was still going to be impressive. They were still going to be fighting for a playoff spot, but you just got to feel bad for AD, man. I mean, is there a bigger loser than him, do you think?
No, not really. And you also got to add in the fact that he's going to a Mavs team that just did Luka so dirty and that doesn't have Mark Cuban, who's been one of the better owners in the NBA as long as I've been alive. So I don't think I want to play with that environment. It's a great market, but terrible ownership at this point.
Right. You bring up a great point in Mark Cuban. So he sold his shares in the Mavericks, correct? So you got to imagine if he was still here, this doesn't happen, right? I mean, the guy's been quoted saying he'd pick Luka over his wife. How do you feel about the direction of this Mavericks team post-Cuban? Would this have happened with Cuban? I mean, what do you think?
It would not have happened with Cuban. And, you almost think it's the kind of thing of like, there's a new sheriff in town and they have something to prove. They got the keys to the car and they want to show that, that they have the keys to the car. They want to flex that a little bit and, start to build their environment, have their system. And, that's where I feel like it's kind of the same thing with it's the other side of the trade now, but when Matt LaFleur got to Green Bay, he didn't want Aaron Rodgers anymore.
Right.
He doesn't want, the old kids' toys. But it's Luka.
Mm-hmm.
It's Luka. There's nothing that could justify that decision, and Mark Cuban knows that.
Right. I mean, it's just, the whole reason you play the sport, the whole reason you're in the front office is to hope that you can land one of the guys, the Jokic, the Giannis, the Lukas, and you had one in-house. And he had already taken you to the finals. It's not like this is a guy that, had struggled in the playoffs. He's one of the greatest playoff performers of all time. Like, averaging 30-point triple-doubles against, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George in his first ever playoff series. He, took him to a final series last year, and he didn't play great against Boston. He lacked defensive effort, etc. But you had the guy in house, man. Like, that's what you're in the business for, is to get one of those guys, and when you got him, you can't let him go. You can't let go. That's why the Chiefs signed Mahomes to a 10-year deal. Once you know you have the guy, you hold on to him for dear life, and the Mavericks just didn't do that. So, who do you think is the biggest winner of this trade?
JJ Redick, right?
That's interesting.
I mean, he is number 7, number 8 all-time shooting percentage, and I just think he's about that young, scorer, talented, not as much of a disciplined guy. Maybe kind of like a Mike McDaniel, but I love the idea of Luka in a JJ Redick offense, and I think it kind of gives him more hope. Whereas, a questionable year with all these new things he said he was going to do. I saw a very early debate about whether or not he was going to have a long tenure as the Lakers head coach, but I think moving forward, especially with Luka, he can find a way to make it work.
It's very interesting. I think a lot of people were skeptical of the JJ Redick hire at the time, and he has been very good, to your point. I think, in my opinion, the biggest winner is probably going to be Luka, right? I mean, the guy's going from a team that clearly didn't believe in him, despite building a team around him, which is another story of this trade. Like, you had a bunch of defenders around the guy who's not good at defense to cover that weakness. And clearly they didn't think enough of him to keep him. So, the Lakers front office has gotten a lot of flack over the years with Rob Pelinka as GM, and, his Russell Westbrook move, or, other things that they've done in the front office that has been questionable. But I think Luka is going to put a patch on all that. I mean, when you have a great player, it covers up the mess ups that front offices make. I mean, look at guys like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. I think if Sean McDermott or John Harbaugh had anybody else at quarterback, if they had one of those average game managers that are in the league, their jobs they'd probably be on the hot seat by now. But Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen take them far enough into the playoffs every year to cover it up and make them look probably more competent than they really are. So I think with, these next couple years of proper free agent signings and development, if Dalton Knecht really becomes one of the top shooters in the league, like he has the potential to, and Austin Reeves continues to be one of the young, great two-way players in our game, I think that they really could contend. It's going to depend on how much longer LeBron has. I did mention in my initial thoughts of this trade that I think, this trade wasn't made for them to win a championship now, and I think that they either got word or they got worried that LeBron was going to be done within the next 2 years. So, if Dallas calls you and says, "Hey, we'll give you a top 3 player," you take that every time. So it's a great move for LA. It's a great move for Luka. I think he's going to be happy in Los Angeles, and I think for the next 10 years, I think Luka's still going to remain in those conversations of MVP, finals caliber teams, as long as the LA Lakers do right by him.
For sure.
So over the weekend, another trade that went down in the NBA was Zach LaVine of the Chicago Bulls getting traded to the Sacramento Kings, and starting point guard for the Kings, De'Aaron Fox, goes to the Spurs. I think the biggest story of this is, how does this affect Wembanyama? Being as he's one of the great young stars in the game today. I think the question really has been, who's going to be his 2? And the Spurs didn't find that his rookie year quite yet. They do have a young team around him, but nobody has, really taken that jump to be a definitive 2 to Wembanyama. And I think bringing in an all-star, a proven guy like De'Aaron Fox, I think that they might have found their guy. I mean, he really complements Wemby's game well, a perimeter, skyscraper, a guy who's one of the best interior defenders we've ever seen, with a super athletic slashing point guard. I think that's a match made in heaven, don't you think, right?
Yeah, I mean, Brady found his Gronk, right?
Right. That's a great comparison for sure. Is there a bigger winner than Wemby, do you think? Is there...
I mean, he's got a shoe deal. He's got his future mapped out in San Antonio. And, I mean, you're talking about how the Mavs built this culture around Luka, and now they're taking Luka out of it and what happens to the team. But this is the Spurs showing they're doubling down on Wemby. Obviously, a generational prospect, generational talent thus far, but don't let him just be a generational what if, right? Like, double down on it, get him anything and everything he wants, and yeah, I mean, I think he'll do great things in the future.
100%. It's like we said, when you have the guy, you lock him up as long as you can. Bringing in a guy who already expressed interest that he was getting ready to leave the Kings in a year and a half when his deal expires. I think it was smart for the Kings to get whatever they could out of him in a trade now. I don't know if Zach LaVine is the answer to that. I think Zach LaVine is a very, very fine player. But outside of scoring, what is he? You know what I mean? He's an inefficient 25 or 30 a night, and other than that, he's not really giving you anything else. So, that it brings the question for Sacramento. You have older guys like Sabonis. Guys who, what's the path for them now? Because you had Fox and Sabonis together to, hopefully contend, and you realize that you really aren't in that contender conversation. And it's smart to move off those guys now and really blow the thing up. But, is Sabonis going to be on the move this deadline? Is he a name we need to watch out for? What do you try and run back the system, but with LaVine at guard instead of Fox? Like, what's the direction for the Kings, do you think? Rebuild or try and contend with the current guys?
I mean, I think it just looks like they're kind of accepting the fact that this run is just done. You're not going to get much more out of it, and like you said, you're just trying to get the most value while you still can. While your pieces are still somewhat content there, or if they want out, just let them have their way. I don't think Luka wanted out of the Mavs, but like we're seeing in the NFL right now, there are guys who are just in the mood to contend more, or be in better environments that value their talents more. And we're going to talk more about that later with Myles Garrett. But same thing with like Tyreek, right? He wants out of Miami, or he did want out of Miami for some amount of time because they couldn't contend, and they didn't give him the right tools that he felt he deserved. So I think it's great for De'Aaron Fox. I think it's great for Wemby. As far as the Kings go, I mean, I don't see it getting much better for them.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, LaVine had a good stretch in Chicago, but he's just not the kind of guy that you can win a championship with. I mean, you need a more well-rounded guy, and I mean, Sabonis is able to plug in some of those holes. He's an elite rebounder, elite mid-range, and paint scorer, but they just don't have enough holes filled in on that roster. And I think with the scattered age gap that they have, I think it is time to really throw in the towel, blow it up. So Spurs future's looking good. Sacramento looking like they're going to blow it up and rebuild. Chicago has been a team that has been stuck in the middle for quite some time now, between buying, trying to contend, and selling / blowing it up and rebuilding. And one of the biggest knocks on Chicago and also the Miami Heat is that they never really went all in. And Miami was more towards the side of really being a contender, but they never made that move to give Jimmy hope. It was always on Jimmy's shoulders because of whether it be Tyler Hero injuries, just a lack of talent around him. He really had to do everything just to get Miami, into those conference finals or finals. So Chicago in that aspect was a team that, was just good enough to win a decent amount of games, never a team that, was going to have high lottery odds, but they never had the talent or the cap space, the young guys to, really compete. So they were always a play-in team at best with Zach LaVine there. And, you have older guys like Nick Vucevic, who is a potential trade target for teams like the Lakers, considering they need a big man. So I think it's nice to see for Chicago that maybe they're finally taking that step in selling and blowing it up, because it's been long overdue. I mean, ever since the Derrick Rose, Jimmy Butler era, they really haven't been contenders. So how do you feel about Chicago in this outcome? Do you think that this is a step forward for them? I mean, obviously record-wise, they'll probably be taking a step back. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, no coach and no player wants to take that backseat role and just say, yeah, next year, 2 years from now is when we're really going to come for the title. But when you're that far away from contention, it's like we see a lot of lukewarm teams in the NFL. We've seen them for a while. Denver's been one of those teams that, just now they're getting their stars together and they're finding a way to utilize Cortland Sutton now that he has a quarterback. But, like, you can have those pieces and still lose games regardless of, how many of those pieces you have, those mid-tier guys, those B to A-tier guys. And I think starting to liquidate some of those assets that you have on that roster is the best thing long run. It just sucks right now for Chicago sports fans in general. But, next year we're going to see the results of what the Bears have done. They had a 7-9 year with Justin Fields and decided to move on. And I was the first person to question that decision. But now, with how they're looking next year with the right free agency signings, I think it's going to be an insanely good roster. And it just takes that tough decision to move on and to take your 1 or 2 seasons of terrible records to get through it.
100%. And, this really speaks to how important off seasons are, in any sport, how important free agency signings, how important the correct draft picks are, mortgaging cap situations here, manipulating deals, etc. It really shows how good certain front offices are and how lackluster others are when teams like the Rams and the Eagles, who, for extended periods of time don't have first round picks. The Lakers mortgaged a bunch of picks to get Anthony Davis. The Nets mortgaged a bunch of picks to get their superstars, and so did the Phoenix Suns. You know what I mean? It really speaks to who's competent and who isn't upstairs when teams are continuously in championship discussions despite manipulating things like that and the cap. So I think you make a good point about how they were in that lukewarm tier, and so was Sacramento at the end of the day. I mean, they had that fun playoff series a couple years back against Golden State where, Curry ultimately dropped a gazillion points in Game 7 and sent him home. But, other than that, what really have they been in the De'Aaron Fox era? It's been a play-in-ish caliber team. They've never been a top seed, really. And with that core of guys, they're not touching a young team like OKC. They're not touching a young team like Houston. So I think Chicago's making the right decision here. It really is going to come down to, who they build this team around, because they do have guys like Giddey, guys like Kobe White, who are young and have shown flashes but haven't really taken that all-star caliber leap. So I think continuing to sell, blow the whole thing up, I think that's definitely the right decision for them. As far as NBA trade deadline goes, I believe it's Thursday the 6th, so about 2.5 days from now. Is there any key trades that you see happening? Is there any names? I mean, we're going to touch on Jimmy Butler in a minute, but is there anybody else that you may think that might be on the go? Guys like Kevin Durant, I mentioned Vucevic on the Bulls before. He's, a great fit for the Lakers if they're in need of a big man, Is there anybody else that maybe you see?
I mean, we're going to know, what all happens before this podcast even drops, because, we'll drop on Friday and the deadline's Thursday. But I think the Suns have got to be waiting to hear out the Heat and Jimmy, right?
Yeah, Devin Booker's been in some trade talks. Like you said, Kevin Durant as well. I think Houston is definitely in conversation for those guys. They've gone the Oklahoma City route of, just get rid of everybody. They sold out of the Harden era and just started young. They drafted guys like Şengün, like Amin Thompson last year, guys like Jalen Green, superstars that are in the making. Do you think, Oklahoma City's obviously the 1 seed right now and very dominant in this regular season, keeping their young core of guys together despite multiple people calling for trades during this come up? Do you think it makes sense for maybe a team like Houston to, go all in on an older guy like Kevin Durant or Devin Booker and, mortgage some of their future all-star caliber guys like, Reed Shepherd, their first-round pick this year, or, Fred VanVleet, Jabari Smith, guys like that? Does it make sense to maybe go get a Devin Booker with that?
Yeah, I mean, if your window's closing, just close it all the way. and make this year your year. And it depends on what your playoff picture looks like as well. Like if you're already just so far from having a clear path through to have that championship appearance, then it's just out of the question. But if you feel like this is going to be your last run for Phoenix, we still talk about them potentially trading for Jimmy, but like, how does that look? Are they going to be able to mesh Jimmy's style with KD and with D-Book? It's a short season. It's a long season in the NBA, but it's a short season, and sure. That's just where I say, yeah, if your window's already closing, then you might as well go all in this year, but you're not trying to eat that contract for years to come and pay in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, you see the Brooklyn teams, of the last couple of years that went all in on guys like Kyrie, KD, and Harden, and in theory, when you got an all-star roster on paper, who's going to stop you? But then when you actually put it on the court, things don't actually mesh that great. And, one injury here or there, and all of a sudden it's not quite the same team because you have no bench. So, in my opinion, I think a team like Houston should maintain the course. Doesn't make sense to mortgage a guy who's going to be good for the next 10 years for a guy who, is injury prone and, is going to start to decline. Cough, cough, Mavericks and Luka. But I think another name to watch out for, I think this is more probable than other people do. I think LeBron, there's a small chance LeBron goes to Golden State. I know, it's a rumor and, who would ever trade LeBron James, but like, I think if the Lakers are serious about, just like you said, just close the window all the way, reset it, go trade LeBron James for all of Golden State's future and go get a guy like Jonathan Kuminga, an athletic forward to pair with Luka Doncic and a boatload of picks, and start a rebuild the right way. You know what I mean? Have Steph and LeBron ride it out together. They've hinted at it for years. If they decide not to go that way, I think Vucevic or Sabonis from the teams we mentioned previously would be great fits in LA if they can get the cap situations to line up. As long as you keep Austin Reeves, I think anybody on that team should be touchable. I think you either go all in or you fully go for the rebuild here if you're LA. But I think the main topic of this trade deadline is really going to be Jimmy Butler with the Heat. Is there a destination or two that you think he fits the best? You mentioned a team like Phoenix who maybe is buying, maybe they're selling. A team like Golden State that desperately needs a second star around Steph. I mean, he's getting triple teamed in these games, and his statistics are suffering, but they're still not winning.
Right.
So, what's a good destination you think for Jimmy Butler?
It's definitely not the good move long run as we've seen in the NBA and in the NFL. You want a young roster, talented roster who's going to have multiple years to figure it out. But for a guy like Jimmy Butler who's just falling out of his athletic prime, sure, why not take an already aging team and add another aging superstar, but somebody who is going to just have that threat of being Jimmy Butler moving forward. And I think Phoenix has been the first team that's come to mind for me in that regard. But yeah, you could see it for a team like Golden State too. As you mentioned, if they're willing to go all in for a guy like LeBron, then obviously Jimmy Butler, somebody who's capable of carrying a team on his back the way LeBron has for so many years in LA when AD's been unhealthy. I think he's the perfect kind of guy to pair with Steph and Golden State.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think Jimmy and Golden State would probably make some noise if you're getting, 2021, 2022 version of Jimmy Butler. If you're getting the version that we've seen as of late, maybe not as much noise because this is just a loaded Western Conference. I think it really depends what they mortgage up for him. I think if you're Golden State, unless you go all in on a guy like LeBron, I think you got to keep Kuminga. I think you got to keep some of the young talent that you do have because when Steph retires, which it's looking like it's going to be sooner rather than later from what he's been hinting, this team's going to be a mess if they don't have any young talent. And Kuminga is the main young talent that they have because they got rid of a guy like Jordan Poole.
Similarly, when we're talking about off seasons and who's going to be younger next year, who's going to be older, who's going all in but at the expense of their future, the Cleveland Browns, I think we're both kind of in agreement that they, by granting Myles Garrett this trade, which it looks like they're going to, are looking to have a full rebuild by the time that Deshaun Watson's contract is over, dead and done. I think they want to have a franchise QB, but before that, they want to have just some cap space to work with, some additional picks to work with. Some projections have him going for a first, third, and a fifth, in next year's draft alone. And I don't know that he's worth quite that much. I don't know what his contract looks like, but Myles Garrett is, a I think, more than one Defensive Player of the Year award. And he's just been so dominant, probably one of the best ends in the league for, the last 6-7 years he's been in the league. It's time for him to find a contender, the same way it was for AB to go to that Bucs team, and for D-Hop right now in Kansas City. But yeah, we're looking at a couple different teams, a lot of teams that are in good cap situations, including the Chicago Bears, the Washington Commanders. I believe the Titans are up there in cap space.
I would assume so. They got a young team.
Right, and you're looking at a team that is going to need that experience and that presence in the locker room to really elevate and make them championship caliber. Myles Garrett has never been to the big game, but regardless of that, I think we know that he has what it takes to win, the same way Aaron Donald was in LA for years and years and years and made it work in his last 2 or 3 years of his career. So
yeah, so the Titans are about league average for cap space. They got about $44 million. I think this trade is eerily similar to Khalil Mack going to Chicago in, I think, 2018. And that being said, the Bears at the time gave up 2 first-round picks, a third, a sixth, and a second and a conditional fifth. So boatload of picks for a guy who was 2 years younger than Myles Garrett is right now. But I think Myles Garrett is better than Khalil was then.
I would agree.
So, once again, a top 3 to 5 player in the sport being up for trade talks. I think, you call a team like Green Bay, a Washington, teams that are in that playoff discussion with a young, promising QB. The Texans managed to get Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, so they have their edge situation, handled. But one of these teams like the Packers, who had such an underwhelming pass rush this year, and Washington, who we've discussed before, just has an awful defense, which they need to bolster to get Jane to the big game. These are just some of the teams that could be great destinations for him. Is there a favorite in your eyes?
I think the favorite, just from what I've seen in projections, has been Chicago, for the sake of already having that scheme and their number one need besides the O-line being their defensive line, with how great their pass defense already is. I kind of don't expect it to be Chicago, and I think it's from the standpoint of Myles is in it to win a Super Bowl at this point. He's not about going to the destination that has the most cap space so they can pay him the most. I think Washington's a perfect fit with that in mind, because they do have all the cap space. They can take on his contract, but they were in the championship this year, and they're going to make the right moves this offseason, more than likely, with their new ownership and their new coaching,
right,
to equip him to win. If I'm Myles Garrett, I'm looking at that Washington team, and while the Chicago roster is better and their coaching is probably going to be better next year, Jaden Daniels is already a proven playoff winner, and they found a way to make that defense serviceable. You have the ability to prove your worth that Cleveland has underutilized for the last few years on this young, talented team. You get to be the guy who elevates it to the next level. And we've seen Washington go for those kind of guys like Bobby Wagner and Marshawn Lattimore, who are aging stars, far out of their prime. I think Myles Garrett is closer to his prime than those two are. I think he's worth a lot more to this Washington team, and I think Dan Quinn would love to get Myles Garrett in his pass rush.
100%. And, the Bears are top 7 in cap space going into this offseason, so they have plenty of room to work with. But some of the contenders here in this top 10, you mentioned the Commanders, sneaky team, the Chargers. They're, I think, fourth most in cap space, so that's, a pretty decent destination. They had a solid defense last year, but personnel-wise, it wasn't the greatest. You add a superstar pass rusher like Garrett. You got to imagine that Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers make some noise there. Another team, the Vikings, are up there. The Lions have Hutch, and they're going to have some younger guys to pay, so it doesn't make sense for them.
And I think they have the guy they already traded for from Cleveland last year to replace Hutch, Zadarius Smith.
Yeah, Zadarius, that's right. As far as outside of that, the Packers make sense. Could you see cross-division trade to the Bengals? Because they do have a decent bit of cap room. They are notorious for being cheap, but would that be a good fit? Finally getting some defensive help for Joe?
I think right now they're in that $50 to $55 million ballpark. Is that
Like
correct?
44, yeah.
44, okay. So they're looking at currently, if the rumors are right from Rappaport and Schefter, they're looking at paying Jamar Chase a stupid amount of money, like $40 million. Like we're talking top of the market quarterbacks 5 years ago. Is it deserved? Absolutely. If you think receivers are ever going to be worth that much, then yeah, Jamar Chase is the one. They already have the league leader in sacks, and maybe it's a skewed stat because there's just no help on that defense. So Trey Hendrickson is just feasting on his own. But they need help everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere else. They have Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson, and I think that's serviceable. I don't think they should be in the position to trade for him. But if I'm Myles Garrett, once again, I'm looking at it and I'm saying this is a proven playoff winner at quarterback. This is a team that has not been far out of the playoffs when he's healthy. Mm-hmm. And they have the ability to make the right moves this offseason the same way they did the offseason prior to their Super Bowl appearance, getting the right help on that defense and drafting Jamar Chase. It's eerily similar to the Washington situation right now, just with a little bit less cap and, a little bit more experience in the roster. So I think he'd love to play alongside Trey Hendrickson and Myles Garrett on the opposite sides of the line would be
terrifying.
Insane.
Yeah. So obviously ring chasing is really the main goal for Myles right now. Of course, that's why he requested the trade. You give a lot of flack to the Mavericks for as monumental as that move was. Myles Garrett is as good a caliber a player for his respective sport as Luka is, and for them to essentially be forced to trade him or likely grant his request, what does this mean for the Browns and their future? I mean, it's beyond messy, but what do you view them as?
They're still like 2 or 3 years out of contention at minimum, just for the sake of their cap space is terrible, one of the worst in the league, and they just don't have a ton of talent. But I think it would enable them to start to build around a QB that they don't even have yet, which is probably something that's more worthwhile than most GMs consider it in the NFL. Sign Jerry Jeudy right now. Give him 4 years, pay him $30 million, with the promise that he showed with Jameis Winston, Deshaun Watson, DTR in those last few games. Like, when he gets a quarterback, he's going to be insane, and more than the Broncos ever showed that he would be. So if you do trade out of a guy like Myles Garrett, you need to get some offensive talent and start rebuilding that defense through the draft.
So they do have the second pick in the draft, and we're going to go super in depth on the draft in an upcoming episode. But, one is probably going to be Cam or Shador, and at 2, if you lose out on Myles Garrett, you got to assume they go Abdul Carter, right? Or maybe the D lineman from Michigan, Mason Graham.
Yeah, I mean, I think with their current cap situation because of Deshaun Watson, you do not draft a quarterback this year. You wait for a year where there's just more promising QBs to where if you slip out of that 1 or 2, pick, you have the ability to pick at 7 or 8 and get, an all-star caliber QB. So I would love to see Abdul Carter to the Browns. I mean, I'd love to see him in Dallas more so because in 2 Penn State guys, that'd be really scary. He's really like Micah Parsons 2.0, but yeah, I mean, think about drafting the next TJ Watt or the next Micah Parsons or the next Nick Bosa. Like, it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a guy to replace the production that Myles Garrett's given you, the closest thing you can find to it in this draft is certainly Abdul Carter. I mean, he's got all the physicals, he's got the elite production at Penn State, but drafting a QB at 2, like you said, just doesn't make sense because we've heard Coach Prime and Shador, when they've been rumored that, oh, maybe the Browns will select him at 2. Yeah, we're good. We're not going there, man. Sorry. So this Browns team definitely needs a lot of reconstruction outside of QB. So it doesn't make sense to bring one in for sure. Bring him into a situation where it's going to be difficult for him to succeed. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens this offseason with Myles Garrett. You think, is there a sleeper team maybe that might jump at him with minimal cap space like a contender?
I mean, I think we'll we'll see soon enough. I don't expect this trade from being far from working out, but man, yeah, I think it'd be one of those cusp of top 5 teams in their respective conferences. You know, maybe a wild card team that wants to make the jump to a division leader. And with that in mind, I mean, not Dallas, just no cap space. Not Miami, just not their style, no cap space. I pray to God it's not Kansas City. But, you know, maybe a Baltimore. I think Buffalo, yeah, for sure. They traded away a lot of their defensive talent, and they have some cap to work with. I know they're making a priority out of extending Josh this year, which does not make sense to me given that they have him signed through 2028 anyway.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I would really – one of these divisional or conference exits would be scary if you throw Myles Garrett in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, Buffalo drafted Greg Rousseau a couple years back, and, you know, he's been a serviceable pass rusher, but – you know, it's really been McDermott's scheme that's made that pass rush look elite. Von Miller has not been what they signed him for at all. Mm-hmm. I think cutting ties with him, you know, he's an older guy. He's probably on his way out the door anyway. Makes sense at this juncture. You know, you let go of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer because you're not going to pay 2 safeties top dollar as elite as they were there. I think all signs point to Buffalo being a strong contender here for Myles Garrett.
For sure. And they have the ability to do it a little bit better than they did with Von Miller and sign him closer to his prime than they did sign Von Miller. So I'd love to see him to Buffalo. I feel like most of these other division winners are just a little too, man, we've got to work out our cap first, or maybe we're not sure about our quarterback first. Like LA, the Rams. Mm-hmm. They're in no position to bring in a vet like that. Like, so much young talent, and we just got to figure out what the future of our QB looks like. Or you look at Detroit, and it's like, man, we've already got enough pass rushers to pay in these upcoming years. Like, we're good. If it's not a team with top cap space, I'd expect it to be one of those fringe contenders who, you know, maybe like Minnesota or Buffalo. This was supposed to be a rebuild. Mm-hmm. We're better than we thought we were. We're just going to get that 1 or 2 stars to get us over the hump.
So I got an interesting team as a destination, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, because this was supposed to be a team with a good pass rush this year, and it really wasn't. Atlanta Falcons got all the weapons in the world, you know, a top, you know, above average, O-line, young quarterback in Michael Penix that you're not paying. What do you think about Myles Garrett to the Falcons?
My only question mark with that is that they are paying a quarterback a lot of money right now, and he is not going to be playing for them next year. So even though they do, you know, skip out on one of the incentives they're giving him by cutting him by February something, I just wouldn't anticipate it with the sake of, you know, just with Kirk's contract in mind. I think they've got to continue to build the old-fashioned way. I think they went all in this year, and it just didn't work out nearly the way they thought it would. So it's time to scale back a little bit, make Penix the guy, just build around him through the draft.
Yeah, and that is probably the smarter decision, I will say. And they don't have the cap space as of right now to make this happen. I just thought it'd be interesting because, you know, you bring in a guy like Matt Judon last year, and how underwhelming was he? You know what I mean? The whole Falcons defensive line was underwhelming. They had one of the worst pass rushes in football. So, you know, if there was a way for them to bring in a guy like Myles Garrett, I mean, that would transform that defense and, you know, send Michael Penix and the Falcons into playoff contention immediately. So it's just some food for thought. I just thought it'd be interesting to see. I mean, how far do you think Michael Penix could get? Could he look like a Jaden Daniels with a competent team around him like that?
I mean, Jaden Daniels doesn't need a competent team around him to look like a Jaden Daniels, so I don't think he's quite that level, but I think give him a couple years and he could be really special. I think the Atlanta culture is not used to winning right now, and I think building it around Penix is the right move. He just, you know, he wasn't given the keys to start the way Jaden Daniels was, whereas all offseason Daniels knew he was the guy and everybody knew he was the guy. So let Penix have an offseason or two to develop and build a rapport with the guys, and I think they could work it out with the unit that they have, assuming they can keep it together with their contracts.
100%.
Final pick for Myles Garrett, I'm going to say I think most likely is probably Chicago, just because we've heard the most talks about it, but my favorite would be Washington.
Yeah, I think my favorite would also be Washington, but as far as teams that have proven to be aggressive, and I think teams that are just slightly more in Super Bowl contention right now in need of that win now move. I think my pick's going to be Buffalo. I think they just desperately need a game changer because the series between Kansas City has just been domination. They need something to change.
Sounds good.
All right, man. Thank you for watching Blitz and Gigs episode 6. We'll catch you guys in the next one.